Hello everybody and welcome to week 3 of our MOOC, English as a Medium of Instruction for Academics. I'm Mary, this is Rob, and here we are again in Southampton on a sort of grey day, but a typical March day for us here in the UK. So we're going to comment on some of the things that have been happening on the MOOC during the week. We're also going to talk about next week, which is a very important week.
An exciting week.
A very exciting week, and
yes.
Next Friday is excessively exciting, but we'll come to that later. I think, Rob, you wanted to start with some comments on gestures? Or was it
I think you wanted to start,
talk
Mary,
about
yes.
something. Okay, sorry. I wanted to talk about gestures. There were quite a few interesting comments about gestures, and I think I'd like to link back to something I said last week, which was about authenticity, in the sense that you have to be yourself, can't you? You can't just rein in your gestures if you feel that you in your culture use a lot of gestures. And similarly, you can't start faking gestures if you feel that that's what you should do. So I'd really like to emphasise the point that you have to feel comfortable and natural in front of your class. You know, relaxing your body, sitting in a comfortable position, standing in a comfortable position, and just trying to be yourself as much as possible. And really just use the gestures that you feel are appropriate to you in your culture, and being faithful to your personality, you know. So this is really what I would like to say. And the reason that I'm mentioning it is that a few people commented on the lecture about pirates and felt that the gestures were perhaps a little bit excessive. That was that person's personality, you know, in that context. So I feel that it's interesting to observe, but we should try and be aware of our body language and our gestures in our context, but not try and change too much, because we have to be true to ourselves.
And I would add to that I personally, I would never isolate one area of language in performance. So for example, gesturing goes with how you speak. And some people said in Stephanie's lecture that they found her gestures to be distracting and hard to follow. So obviously, if you're somebody who uses lots of gestures, if you think about the possible impact that it makes it hard to follow,
Excuse me.
then you'd think, okay, how can I use my visuals? How can I use my voice? How can I use other elements of my delivery to make it easier to follow? And likewise with your language, if your voice is a little bit something people find a little boring, and you find it hard to express excitement, maybe you'd use exciting vocabulary, or you'd use body language or visuals to bring the excitement in another area, because we always, we choose intonation, or we choose pronunciation or gestures in relation to everything else we're doing. So we can't really isolate one thing and say this is good or bad. But there's a possibility, as some people mentioned, I think Ashton and Gabriella mentioned overdoing it.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
The danger of being seen to be artificial, to be seen to be too strong in your gestures and possibly aggressive. And then as long as you're aware of what the possible misunderstanding of your gestures might be, you try and compensate in other areas, I think,
So what you're saying, Rob, then, is that we've got to look at it holistically, haven't we?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so that's maybe a nice term to use, do you think? A sort of holistic view of the lecturer delivering in his or her own
Absolutely.
context.
I think we have to look at everything holistically, because otherwise it's a bit dehumanising.
It is,
You're not really talking about communication, you're isolating parts of communication, which you can't really do.
But we have to isolate them to talk about them in a situation like this, a MOOC, where we're thinking about the whole experience.
Oh, yeah. So how that isolated part fits into the whole, but you have to be holistic in the end, is my point.
I think that's a good point. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. What would you like to move to next? I can see you've got a long list.
I've got a long list, yes. So I could go to, as we were talking about performance, maybe people's comments on the lectures. So we had 2 lectures, one which we saw as possibly more positive than the other. And we should mention that the negative lecture was an actor.
Oh, yes.
He was not, that wasn't an actual genuine lecture that he was given. He was trying to emphasize what he saw as bad aspects of teaching.
And you picked them out very quickly.
Very well, yeah.
Yes.
So just some things that people came up with was the need for planning and clear evidence of planning, because when you enter a room you want to have a feeling as a student or as a participant, this is a well-planned environment. Things like back to the audience could link to like how much respect you're showing to your audience, because it's not really about communication directly, but perhaps how engaged you are with them as opposed to with your content. And we always want to, a lecture is about communicating with people.
And it can seem quite disrespectful as well if you turn your back to the audience. Although you may be in a context where you have to write something on the board, and it is difficult to face your audience and write on the board at the same time.
Absolutely, and take them with you. Take them with you. If you're I don't say there's a rule. Never turn your back to the audience, but you should turn your back to the audience when you're taking them somewhere and you're bringing them and like maybe demonstrating something that's behind you. That's great, but if you're just turning and reading, that's not great.
Exactly.
Also, my biggest annoyance when I watch lecturers is the finishing sentences with a mumble.
Yes.
So, you're talking like this and then you talk to the side, and I'm going to change the side, and then I'm going to come back to the next point. And I can't stand that when I'm in a lecture, and often I look around and see the people watching and they've all stopped listening, and we do it in conversation and it's more forgivable. But when you're watching one person deliver content, it really just switches people off.
Which reminds me that somebody, and I can't remember who it was, I didn't write the name down, emphasised the importance of pausing. And I think we have talked about pausing and silences on other occasions when it's a valuable part of the whole experience. It's not that you don't know what to say or you suddenly are stuck for inspiration. It really does help people. So finishing your sentences clearly and then moving to the next slide is a positive, in my view anyway, and it gives a few seconds for people to process what's going on, catch up, and it's so important.
And it's not always the way that people are trained.
No.
So if you think, what's a good speaker of English? Sometimes people are taught to pass exams where you have to be very, very fluent. You shouldn't pause. But actually in communication, sometimes it's very helpful to pause. There's a real function to that. So excellent point. And also linked to that is vocal fillers or filler words. So people noticed that in the less effective lecture that there was lots of the filling of pauses with words that weren't necessary, and then that just confuses people. You want to reduce mental processing. So people are watching your lecture, the words you choose to use are having some kind of an effect, making them feel positive, delivering content, whatever it may be. We shouldn't just be using words to fill gaps, because then that becomes confusing for the audience.
I think there are two kinds of fillers really. There's the fillers, the ums and the ahs, that actually lubricate our conversation. And then there are those fillers that are inappropriate, so like, where did I put that? And where's the pen? Those things can be very distracting. So I think as teachers, it is good to monitor those little things like where did I put the board wipe, something like that. Where did I put that? And try and eliminate that kind of language, which is very distracting, as opposed to the natural lubricating fillers in speech.
Absolutely. And another thing I just noticed, which is very interesting, because we've looked at the theme of English as a lingua franca, so English used for communication across cultures. And I thought something very interesting was somebody mentioned that in the more positive lecture, there were a lot of long sentences. And long sentences have actually been found to be quite rare in presentations for international audiences, no matter who the speaker is. Naturally, we don't tend to use long sentences because it is harder to process. And so, for example, we might use words like however or in addition or something like that, which is not making the grammar complicated, it's just adding another sentence, which is quite simple. So that's another thing where it's not necessarily effective if you're a very competent speaker of English and have full command of grammar. It's not necessarily very effective to use it when you're presenting. So yeah.
Once again, thinking of the audience, thinking of the context, and choosing, monitoring your language to show that you really have their interests at heart, that you're understanding. It's not just me delivering, but I'm responding to you. I'm knowing my audience, and I'm adapting and changing and transforming, so that our communication is successful. Yeah. I think we ought to move on to some of the very, very positive things that have been suggested during the week. The varying levels of English was a nice exchange between, is it Tu? Do I pronounce it T-H-U? Forgive me if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Tu, Gabriella, Sharif and Ashton. Very practical ideas, and I suggest that everybody can gain from that exchange and perhaps add a few more points to managing different levels of English in the classroom. You know, looking after the strong people, not forgetting the weaker people, you know, giving support to both ends of the spectrum in your classroom. So lovely suggestions there. And lovely examples of good slideshows to watch. We enjoyed reading what you had to say about those.
And I like the fact that Rachel picked up on Jennifer Jenkins from week one and showed some ways in which her presentations wouldn't be very communicative in some environments. And again, but David Martinez said that it's a very interesting point, that it really depends on your field. So on this course, we don't tend to give a list of prescriptions, like this is how you make good PowerPoint slides, because what always comes back is, for example, if you say you shouldn't use long quotations, some of you might say, but what I'm teaching in week 5 of my course is this quotation.
Yes.
So yes, it depends on the content matter and how you engage the audience. So absolutely. So what's good practice for PowerPoint slides can vary, but we start to see some principles that come out of these conversations.
Yeah.
So thank you for those. There are some really good examples there.
Yes, yeah. And can I encourage people, we know that there are lots of people on the course, but perhaps some people are a little bit shy about putting in a comment. Please don't be shy. We want to hear your voices. We want to know what's going on in your heads. So, you know, by week 3, I would hope that perhaps some of the shyer people on the course might have the courage to write a little comment. Just begin by liking something. That's a nice way to start. And that's just a very helpful thing to know, that for the people who have made the effort to write sometimes quite long observations on what we're discussing at that particular point in the course, it's nice for them to have feedback and know that they're being read. So if I can encourage you, please do make your presence felt.
Yeah. And so I've got one more point, and then you can do next week's announcement.
Oh, next week. Yes. Okay.
So I just wanted to say thank you to Evelyn, who mentioned. So we talked about why might classes take longer when you deliver them through another language, and our focus was mostly on you as the deliverer. But actually, the focus should really be on your students, who, you know, you have to think about how long they take to process things, what kind of engagement you want them to have with the content. So actually, yeah, so Evelyn's comment was really talking about the student's perspective rather than the teacher's, which I think is more important. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, we tend to think of ourselves so much,
I
don't
think
we?
of myself a lot. Yes.
Focus on ourselves as teachers, but you know, there are these people called students.
Yes.
So mustn't forget them in the equation. All right. So can we talk about next Friday?
Absolutely, yes.
Something that's happening next Friday, and it's happening at 1 o'clock UK time, and Rob and I will be live. Can you imagine that? You can actually communicate with us in real time. However,
And each other as well.
however,
It's not just us.
we would like to have an idea about the kinds of questions you would be interested in discussing. So if you could post the questions perhaps on our Facebook site, and don't forget that, you know, we have the Facebook site. We've had quite a few new people join the Facebook site. So through the Facebook site, you might like to post a question, or on Futurelearn itself, you can post your question. All right?
On that step.
On that
Yeah.
particular step. If you scroll ahead to week 4, you will see, I forget the number, but that particular step, when we were doing the live Q&A session. And we're really looking forward to that, because it's a great thrill for us, isn't it, to feel in contact with people all over the world. And when you're doing it live, it's tremendously exciting. And I hope you'll feel some of our enthusiasm and excitement.
Okay. Hope it won't have run out by then. Yeah.
Do we have anything else to say?
Not at all. Just thank you for your
Yeah.
participation, for watching.
you.
And yes.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to see you live next week. I can't wait. All right then. So that's us done for today, and see you next week.
Yes. See you next
Bye.
week. Okay, bye-bye.